Great, o kia ora koutou, nau mai haere mai ki te rā tuatahi o Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. Ko Ngāti Raukaua te iwi, ko Ben Walker ahau. I'm a lecturer in the School of Management. Welcome along to the first day of Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. And this session entitled Māori at Mahi, Easy Ways to Use Te Reo Māori when at work. I know some of you might have attended this same session last year, but rest assured the content is a little bit different. So I've kept the same categories of things, but there's some new phrases. So it's not just a rinse and repeat. I might just give it 30 seconds or so for people who are still arriving to get in here, and then we can get started with our session, which will just be for about 15 minutes or so. Also, because this is set up as a webinar, the best way to ask questions is with the Q&A feature, because it allows you to like upvote the questions that you're most interested in hearing an answer to. Because the chat, you know, those of you especially who've taught classes will know it can get quite chaotic. So that Q&A feature is really handy. But it looks like pretty much most people are here now. The numbers have slowed down a bit. So we'll get started with this session. Just a few sort of easy phrases to incorporate into your work life, right? Which is what we're all kind of doing now. And is a setting, really, I think, a very potent setting for being able to revitalize and normalize use of Te Reo Māori, especially like in the university. You know, I feel like it's a very sort of welcoming place for using Te Reo in comparison to, say, some other workplaces where it can feel a little more risky to use the language. So I divided the session up, same categories as last year, because I thought they were quite good categories that kind of capture the types of things that most of us tend to be doing in our work. So we're going to step through today 3 kind of sections and phrases related to these different settings or aspects of work, right? So the first one is ngā hui, meetings, something that all of us are doing quite a bit of. This one is a little bit longer, but ngā kupu whakatimata imera, so email openings. Last year I did email sign-offs, so I thought I'd do the other end this year. And the last one here is ngā wā whakatā, which means break times. You'll notice all of these have ngā at the start, which is a way of indicating that I'm talking about the plural instead of the singular. So in Māori, that is how you indicate a plural, is the use of ngā, right, instead of not having that there. Cool, so let's get started with ngā hui, talking about some phrases that you can use in your meetings. One of the ones I thought about this, like maybe this is more a reflection of how the kind of meetings I'm in or how I do them, but I kind of was thinking about phrases I use quite a bit these days, and this is one that comes up quite often. Sorry for my lateness, or like you might say, sorry I'm late would be how you'd say it in English, right? But this is actually, I found this easier to translate into Māori, into Te Reo. So if you wanted to say, you know, you turn up to a meeting late, you're looking kind of sheepish, you want to say that in Te Reo, this is how you could say it. So you would say, aroha mai mō taku tūreititanga. So aroha mai is also a really good phrase to know in Te Reo because it means sorry. So you can use that for any situation where you need to apologize. Aroha mai mō taku, for my tūreititanga, lateness. So late by itself will just be tūreiti. We put the tanga at the end and it becomes lateness, tūreititanga. Aroha mai mō taku tūreititanga. Sorry for my lateness. Handy one to know if you're like me and you sort of tend to be a bit tardy with your meeting attendance. Another one, right? So you probably, if you get to a meeting and you're late, then you probably miss like a lot of important details that you need to catch up on. So you're probably going to have some questions, right, that you need to ask to get up to speed. So if you wanted to say, I have a question, how would you say that in Te Reo? Well, it's actually very simple. You would say it like this. He pātai tāku. He pātai tāku. You'll notice too, if some of you might notice, but others might not. Some of these letters, you see, have the little macron on top, like pātai, that first A. And so if it has that, it means you hold it for longer, right? So that changes actually the meaning of the word. It's like a little bit like how in, you know, like Mandarin, there's different tones. In Māori, some of the letters, you've got to hold them out longer to convey the meaning, right? So he pātai tāku is how you would say, I have a question. You might also, if you're running the meeting, a common thing that we ask is like, do you have any questions, right? Is there something that you want to ask? Or you might look looking at the person who turned up late thinking, doesn't look like they're quite on board. Maybe I should check in with them. So you might want to ask them, do you have a question? And actually, it's a very similar phrase, but we just changed the ending, right? So instead of talking about ourselves, we're talking about someone else. So you would say, he pātai tāu, right? Do you have a question? So the ending is just changed from that last one. Instead of saying he pātai tāku, I have a question, we say he pātai tāu, and phrased as a question with that, upward inflection at the end, so people know that you're asking a question. Yeah. So those are some phrases for meetings, right? Maybe if we just quickly step back so we can cover those off. Sorry for my lateness. Aroha mai mō taku tūreititanga. Aroha mai mō taku tūreititanga. I have a question. He pātai tāku. He pātai tāku. Do you have a question? He pātai tāu. He pātai tāu. Right? So those are our 3 phrases for meetings. Hopefully those are useful the next time you turn up late to a meeting and you don't know what's going on. So the next sort of segment for today's session, I thought we could cover the inverse of what we did last year. Ngā kupu whakatīmata imera. So ways of opening your emails. And I feel like this is something most people are pretty comfortable with these days. I see a lot of people doing this in the emails already around the university, which is awesome. So all I really wanted to do here is give you just a couple of extras, I suppose, right? Because I used the same analogy last year, the sort of car analogy. But, kia ora, everyone, I guess, knows that. It means hello, hi. And it's like the Toyota Corolla of kind of email openings. It's solid, it's reliable, it's consistent. You can never go wrong with it. So it's totally fine. It's good. Another one, though, and this is one, like, as a Māori speaker, when someone uses this, I'm like, okay, you're trying to, you're sort of getting to that next level or using something a little bit different, is when people open with tēnā koe, right? Again, you see the macrons there on the e and the a, so it means you've got to hold them, tēnā koe, meaning greetings to you. So this is sort of like a slightly sportier version of a Toyota Corolla, right? But then with those 2 things, right? If you already have those 2 things in your kete and you're using them, you can actually, there are a few things you can add on, right? A little bit like this car, with all these things kind of added on to it to make it, I don't know, a little more interesting, I suppose. Yeah, so some of these add-ons that are helpful for adding on to those openings are these ones here, right? So you can add these words onto the openings to kind of contextualize the opening, depending on who it is you're speaking to, right? So the obvious one, again, many people know this one, kia ora koutou. That's where you're speaking to a group. So you're saying like, hi everyone, or, in the southern states of America, they might say hi y'all, right? If you're speaking to 2 people though, instead of a group, so in Māori, there is that distinction you see a lot between pairs or dyads and groups. It's different. So you wouldn't say koutou if you're just speaking to 2 other people. Instead you would say like kia ora korua, hello you two, right? So that is important. And sometimes when people are first learning Te Reo, you see them kind of figuring out when to use those 2 things, right? So koutou is for a group, so 3 or more. Korua is for 2 people. Another thing, if you're like friendly with someone or you know them, instead of saying just kia ora, you can say kia ora e hoa, right? Or you can say tēnā koe e hoa. So it's a way of sort of casualizing the message and making it feel a little more informal and intimate, I suppose. If you're talking to your team, so if it's an email to your team, you can still use koutou, right? But if you want to show that it's specifically to your team, you could say something like kia ora e te tīma, right? Hi team. It's something I use a lot with the tutors, for example, on my course. And another one that you can use if you've ever been fortunate enough to receive Dougal McNeil's messages, he's very good at using this one. So hoa mahi mā at the end, right? So kia ora hoa mahi mā, that means colleagues, right? So it's all work colleagues, basically. So all of these things you can add on to those initial ones. Tēnā koe is a little bit trickier than kia ora. With kia ora, you can just add these things straight on to the end, and it makes total sense, right? Kia ora koutou, kia ora korua, kia ora e hoa, kia ora e te tīma, kia ora hoa mahi mā. You can add all those things on, it's fine. With tēnā koe, you have to take out the koe often, right? So instead of saying, you wouldn't say tēnā koe koutou, because it's saying hello, you all. It doesn't really make sense. You would say tēnā koutou, tēnā korua, right? But then if you are talking to an individual person, you leave the koe in. So if I want to say tēnā koe e hoa, right? Hello there, friend, right? Greetings, friend, then I leave it in. With team, again, that's a little bit trickier. So you would say tēnā koutou, right? Hello everyone, e te tima. So it's quite a long one. And same with hoa mahima, tēnā koutou hoa mahima, right? So you've got to, with the tēnā koe, you've got to think about whether the koe stays in there or you swap it out for a koutou or a korua, right? So it's a little bit more testy, but it's good kind of practice, and it's good to mix it up a bit too. And people who speak Māori or are learning Māori, they'll notice you kind of, you know, doing these things and respect the effort. I certainly do when I see people sort of go that next step. It's really cool. And again, not to say anything's wrong with kia ora. Kia ora is awesome. As I said, it's like Toyota Corolla, best-selling car in New Zealand. Everyone loves it, right? It's consistent, it's awesome. But you can be a little bit more interesting and daring with some of your email openings, as well as just helping to contextualize the message, right, to the specific situation you're communicating in. So the last, that's a little bit on the email openings. The last sort of section, and again, I've kept this from last year, is things that you can say on your break times, which again is another very important part of work, right? It's what we do, it's how we socialize and everything. So it's good to know a few phrases to use there. One of the things I find is often, you know, in terms of small talk around the university, a question people love to ask is sort of, are you teaching these days, of academics at least, right? Because that is often a big way that academics, I suppose, organize their calendars, and you can sort of get a sense of their mood based on whether they're teaching or not. If they're kind of frazzled and a little bit stressed out, chances are they are. So are you teaching these days? How would we say that in te reo? You would say, kei te whakaako koe I ēnei rā, right? So you can see the colors sort of try and approximate the parts of the English sentence that they capture. But ako is the word for teach, but if we wanted to say teaching, like anything in Māori, if you put whaka at the start of it, it means that it's something that you're doing, right? So teach is the word, but if we want to say that we're teaching, that we're doing that, then we would say whakaako, right? And that you can actually put that at the start of almost any word to create that meaning. So yeah, whakaako is the word for teaching, and these days, I ēnei rā, right? Everyone knows, I suppose, the word rā, meaning day. I ēnei is saying these sort of days, right? Kei te whakaako koe I ēnei rā. Another thing that often happens on break times is you react to things that people say to you, the stories that they tell you, or something that happened to them on the weekend, right? And often it's like, oh no, like, not that they're teaching, like I love teaching is awesome, but like things that could happen to them, and you want to express that reaction. And one of the ways in Māori people do this is the most common way that people do this, they say, oh where, right? Oh where. I use that with my daughter all the time when we're talking, and she'll tell me a story about something shocking that happened at kohanga. You say, oh where, you know, and it's sort of just an expression of that sentiment of, oh no, that's not a good thing. So yeah, it's a really good one to use. It's very simple, you know, and it's an easy thing to incorporate into that sort of, not just the formal language of work, like not just emails, but like the informal language. You know, if you're talking with someone and you want to express that reaction, oh where is really, really good, an easy way to do that. And the opposite of that, because we don't just want to react to people's negative stuff, we also want to know how to react to the good stuff, is like if something happens and you want to say, oh, that's awesome, that's great, that's amazing. There's lots of ways. I was thinking about this yesterday when I put these slides together. I'm like, actually, there's a lot of ways you can say that in Te Reo Māori. These are just some of them, by the way. There's others, and there's some that are like specific to certain, like more specific to certain rohe, like regions, or to certain iwi that have their own sort of idioms and ways that they put this. But these are some of the most common ones, right? You might say karawe, you might say tauke, you might say miharo, or you might say ka mau te wehi, right? A few more words in there. Ka mau te wehi is a really cool one, because the idea of wehi is kind of we don't have time to get into it here, but if you just Google Wehi Māori, you'll be able to find some stuff that tells you, it goes all the way back to the sort of tūturu, the traditional kind of Māori view of emotions and things. And it incorporates that idea of wehi into that expression. So it's a really cool one in that sense, because it's not just a phrase, it's actually connecting you to that sort of Māori perspective on strong emotions, right? So it's a long thing to kind of explain, and it'd probably mess it up, but definitely Google it, and there's a lot of resources online that will explain that concept of wehi to you. So it's kind of cool in that sense as well. Not that the other ones are bad or anything. Other ones are all totally fine and valid, and I use them all the time myself. But yeah, I think it's that last one, Kamote Wehi, I'd give a sort of special shout out to and encourage you to think of ways of incorporating it in, because it is cool how it connects with the sort of Te Ao Māori in terms of its view of emotions. So I think that's all I had. I remember from last year, so Kuamutu finished. I remember from last year, there were quite a few questions that people had. So I might just check those out now. So Fernando asked, I think I click answer live. Does the university have any more advanced courses available for staff students? I think so university I know does have a Te Reo program that they run for staff. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but I know it's on like the staff intranet that they offer those classes. If you did want to go to the next level, I mean, there's also the Te Reo classes, that we run for students that anyone can sort of enroll in. So that is the option too, to sort of go to the next level. And another really good question, that's the name, Te Hāpai, yeah, kia ora monua. And Fernando asked another really good question, is what's the difference between a next to each other and a with the macron? So if you're from Tainui, sort of Waikato rohe, right? They often spell and they don't use the macron, right? This is sort of a tradition, a difference in convention. They will use those two letters next to each other to indicate the longer R, right? So that is a spelling that is specific to that sort of group. And often it's actually quite handy, because if someone uses that in an email, I can tell that they're from that rohe, so I can I'm a uri of Tainui Waka as well, so I can kind of, make that connection. So it's very handy. Sometimes too, like in the word whakaaro, that isn't a macron, that's actually the two words next to each other, and it's just that the two A's happen to be side by side, whakaaro, right? So they join up. But yeah, if you see someone using the double A's instead of a macron, it's a good sign that they're from the sort of Waikato rohe, and they're using that way of spelling it. Cool. O ngā mihi, Joanne. I think that's all the questions. Yeah. And I can't actually see hold on. Oh, Mary, colleagues, hoa mahi mā. What about one colleague? I'll just say that one. Hoa mahi mā. What about one colleague? Yeah. You would say, if you wanted to say, hello, my colleague, I mean, I would just say I would just keep it at kia ora or tēnā koe. But if you did want to be really specific, you could say, tēnā koe e te hoa mahi, right? So the e te hoa mahi is adding that on, and it's changing it from a plural to the singular, e te hoa mahi, tēnā koe e te hoa mahi. Muddy, can he pātai tau only be used for one person? So yes, that would be using it for one person. If you wanted to ask that of many people and say it in the meeting, then you could say he pātai tā koutou, right? I think I might have messed that up. Maybe someone else will say it differently, but I think that's how I would say it. Or you could also say kei a koutou tahi pātai, do you have any questions? Right, so a couple of different ways you could do that. But yeah, he pātai tāu would generally be just for asking that of one person. Jessica Goodwin, how do you say hello friends, plural? You could say kia ora e hoa mā. Yeah, so adding the ma, you see that hoa mahi ma, right? Or sometimes that like, with my daughter and her friends, you might say tamariki ma. Ma is a way of saying, you know, all of you. So you could say kia ora e hoa ma, or yeah, tēnā koutou e hoa ma, right? Whereas if you leave the ma off, it's just singular, e hoa, right? Kia ora e hoa is just talking to one person. Kia ora e hoa ma, it's like hello friends, plural. Yep. Tēnā koe Lynn, kia ora. All right. Well, I think we went a little bit over time, but kei te pai. Hopefully that's been helpful and useful for all of you. And I'm glad I was able to get through all of the questions this year because I wasn't able to do that last year. But yeah, we'll leave it there. All the best for the rest of Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. Hopefully some of those phrases you can find a way to incorporate into your day or to your week. And yeah, all the best with it. Let's keep up the kōrero this week. Kia ora koutou.